When it comes to car combat, the first thing everyone thinks about is probably Twisted Metal. While it did not create the genre, it revolutionized the scene into what we know it as today. I wanted to look at some of the other games that tried to rip off Twisted Metal and find out if they are good alternatives or worthless pieces of junk that should never be played. Keep in mind, I'm not using the term rip-off as a knock on the games because some of them may actually be good. It's more of how the development studios were ripping off the success that Twisted Metal created in the 90s. I may go more in depth on these games eventually. Here, I'm just going to do a broad overview. Assault Rigs was released in 1996, very early on in the vehicular combat craze. The development team Cynosis was trying something different. Rather than the main objective being killing everyone in the level, they attempted at making the game more focused on item collection, which is interesting, I guess. The objective of every level is driving around finding these gems while solving these quote-unquote puzzles, even though I would not call them puzzles because a 10-year-old could figure these levels out, but sure. The first thing I noticed, obviously, was the bizarre background. I don't really understand where we're supposed to be. There are open mouths, wireframe walls. It's all strange and disturbing. Who designed it this way? Another thing I don't understand is the controls. Actually playing the game is very difficult because instead of using a gas or accelerate button, they decided to make the D-pad all of your movements. Holding up drives forward, down makes you go backwards, and if you want to strafe, you press the L1 and R1 buttons. This is before the DualShock controller, so there were no analog sticks. It probably would have been better if that was the case. This is just something I don't get when it comes to these games that rip a franchise off. You probably played the game you're trying to rip off, so why not take the best part about it, which was the controls, and put them in your own game and make something good out of it, like Vigilante 8, for example. It's so slippery, I'm always bouncing off the damn walls, struggling to do anything or even play the game, but before even talking about the actual experience, listen to this shit. As I said, L1 and R1 make you go left and right, L2 and R2 switch your weapons, which is normal I guess, X and circle are your shoot weapons, and triangle is brake. Was this game made for monkeys? That's what it felt like the first time playing this. The controls are horrendous. In Twisted Metal everything feels natural. Square is driving, X is your brake so you can do quick turns around corners, and all of the shoulder buttons are for your weapons. It makes sense. Here there are movement buttons on the shoulders while also having weapon selection there, and actually firing your weapons are the face buttons, which also has stuff for movement. It's awful. There's nothing else to say about these controls. They're rancid. When it comes to playing the game, you have your choice of 3 tanks that have minor differences between each other to the point where it doesn't matter who you pick, which is never a good sign and why I didn't mention it earlier. They all start the level with the same weapon, which is this triangle thing. Basically, when you run into a turret or whatever enemies you're supposed to be fighting in this game, you keep pressing X and that's it. There's no depth, no thought, or anything put into it. You just keep pressing X. You can pick up weapons by breaking these blue spinning cubes, but I don't really see much of a point to using them. Maybe there are some that are stronger, but the only noticeable thing to me is how they fired. No enemies have health bars, so the damage I'm doing has no impact or satisfaction whatsoever. Every single encounter goes like this. And yes, the game did change art style partway through. When you reach a certain level, I think it was 7 or 8, the game changes into a more realistic style, which is cool I guess because they wanted to make a quote-unquote different worlds, but the game still feels exactly the same thing, which is fucking boring. It was putting me to sleep playing it. Every single stage plays exactly the same. Sure, you may need to push a box here or there, maybe open up a small area, blow up a wall, but that's not fun or engaging gameplay. I enjoy puzzle games, but these genres don't mix. You have a game where you want me to solve some puzzles, but also shoot at random enemies that you can honestly avoid because they don't have any purpose of being there. Nothing really happens when you kill them. Even in that big toilet bowl level where all the tanks went apeshit landing on the ground, I didn't even have to fight them. They just got in the way of me collecting my gems, which is boring because it's barely creative, and fighting enemies is fucking boring because there's no creativity involved there or satisfaction. You tried to do different things and you failed at both. There are 40 levels in this game. Seriously, hats off to anyone who can finish all 40 of them. I got sick of it after 2 or 3, and I used a password to see the final level in the game, which seems to be this military theme. My vehicle looks like a motorboat on tank treads. The level was impossible to control. I could barely move, and it wasn't fun, and I shut it off because I just couldn't take any more of it. I feel like these guys are trying to be overly creative, which I use very loosely, when they should have just leaned into either being a puzzle game or a car combat game, not both, because there's nothing good I can say about either portions of the game. This is the first one I decided to take a look at out of the stack I have, and it sucks. It's just terrible. I would not recommend playing this out of curiosity either. It's so boring to the point where you could bottle this game up and sell it on shelves. It would put NyQuil out of business. Thank God we are done with that piece of trash, and hopefully Battletanks Global Assault will be a better game. The PlayStation version released in 2000, but the Nintendo 64 version came out in 1999. I will be playing the PlayStation 1 version here. A lot of the games that released towards the end of the PlayStation lifecycle were not good, due to Sony allowing more third-party companies to come in and release stuff. That never gives me any hope at all, but I pray it will be decent at the very least. The first thing I need to say is I don't know what the fuck this character is, but it apparently seems to have a family, proving love is available for anyone in the world. Battletanks goes for a different approach. Instead of having a traditional character selection screen then going into the game, you actually pick them at the beginning of each level. The first stage gives you one singular tank to pick from, and your objective is to destroy everyone around you. Simple enough. Future ones will allow you to have more options, which adds a nice sense of progression to the game, opening up new things as you play more. The control is mind-blowingly awful again. I really hope this isn't a common theme. It's not the same shit level as Assault Rigs, but it's very close. Yes, I understand you're driving a tank, but sometimes you need to sacrifice realism for gameplay to make it more enjoyable. It feels like I'm on a goddamn ice skating rink when I move. It takes ages to turn around because you need to stop, then go, and if you want to turn around another corner, you need to stop, then turn, then go. It kills the flow, and you can never build up momentum during your session because anytime you need to turn, everything comes to a halt. If you're in a small area, good luck trying to control yourself. You have more control over the weather than you do for the character in this game. It's horrible, but the game itself is not that bad. You can actually play this for a little while without wanting to drink rat poison, which cannot be said about Assault Rigs. The objectives vary from level to level, making it feel a bit different. There are some where you need to simply kill enemies, others where you need to protect convoys, there are ones where you need to destroy buildings. Granted, it does get tedious, but coming off of Assault Rigs, this is a breath of fresh fucking air. Most of the levels are short. There are 40 of them again. Yes, actually 40, so the game should not be done in one sitting unless you can speedrun this. Most stages can be finished in about 2 to 3 minutes if you know how to complete them. It just gets repetitive too quickly. There's not much depth to the gameplay. Like, you can pick up some different weapons, which you fire with the square button. These guys decided to go with the subpar control scheme again, but the people that purchased this game when it came out thankfully had access to the DualShock controllers. It doesn't feel as great as I assumed it would, but it feels much better than playing it with a D-pad only. At least after you get used to the controls, it becomes more playable. That does not mean they're good by any means, but there is some enjoyment to be had with this game. My biggest issue with the gameplay is the difficulty. There are moments where I just go into a room and I'm dead. There's no indication of anyone shooting at me, like the edge of the screen lighting up, for example, letting me know I'm taking damage from behind or the side. The whole game is balanced around you being able to respawn as a new vehicle. While you play and destroy things, you're able to pick up tank bucks, and if this game was ever remade, I'm sure that's what the microtransaction would be called, but here it's for you to respawn as a new tank. When you run out of tank bucks, you lose and need to start the level over again. So every tank you pick barely has any health or defense whatsoever. The biggest tank in the game is called the Goliath, and I had moments where I got decimated in seconds just turning a corner, but I sit there shooting the same tank I'm playing as on the enemy team, and it takes me 7 to 8 shots to kill it. By the time those would land, I'm dead and need to respawn again. I used to cheat to see the final level of this game. I was just curious to see what the boss would be, and it's hyped up to be Cassandra herself. Don't ask me who that is because I wasn't reading the mess at the beginning of the levels, and I also skipped over 20 of them, so it's to be expected. It was a complete joke. It's never a good thing when I kill the final boss and didn't know the thing I was shooting at was even a boss in the first place. Other than that mediocre, drawn-out mess of a story mode, this game has a lot more stuff to offer. There's a lot of multiplayer content you can play with AI and real players, simple deathmatch mode, something called Frenzy mode, Battle Lord, Tank Wars, and Family mode. So yeah, if you want to play this interactive experience by 3DO with your family, you can. It's funny this game is made by the same people who created one of the worst video game consoles of all time, also called the 3DO. Playing these modes with AI does not do them justice. I'm sure it's more fun with real people or friends, but that does not mean it's a good experience because anything you do with your friends can be fun. Unclogging a shitty toilet with your hands can be fun with them. But if anyone has played these modes with real people, please let me know how they felt. Doing crack and playing family mode does sound like a fun time, and if you lose, you can choke out the person next to you with the controller wire. The game overall is not terrible. I'd probably never play it again, but it's a nice little game. Does it touch Twisted Metal? No, it's still a piece of shit compared to Twisted Metal. By the time this game came out in 2000, the 4 original games were already out, and I would pick any of those games over Battletanks Global Assault any day. One piece of fuck game, one decent game, and now back to this thing. I actually made a video on this game a few months ago, but I really wanted to revisit it and give it a second chance. My initial thoughts on Grudge Warriors were bad. I said this game couldn't compare to Twisted Metal. It was boring, it was not fun at all, but everything deserves a second look to see if it's worth the stand next to Twisted Metal. We have 12 different characters to pick from, and I use that term very fucking loosely because these characters are not different from each other whatsoever. This is one of the only times I'll actually praise Assault Rigs. They were only 3 characters to pick from in that game, but they had a purpose. A small fast one, an average one, and a big slow one. In this game, I can pick whatever gang I want to, but all of them control alike and have the exact same weapons, so why would I ever bother playing through the game again if everyone is the same? It has 0 replay value in that regard, so you'd hope the gameplay is good, right? No, it's not good. With the lack of variety in characters, you'd assume the sandbox would have a lot of things to try out, different weapons to use, and things to mess around with. No, there's 3 weapons in the game, and that's it. You have a laser weapon, a missile, and a grenade. The missile is the only good weapon you can use, so there's no sense in using anything else. The laser is pathetic, it takes 5 million hits to kill someone. The grenade is fine, but less consistent than the missile, but does the same amount of damage as the missile, so why would I ever use the grenade when the clear better option is right in front of me? In the first stage, you have these Tonka-ass cars driving around, but again, this is another game where you can completely avoid them and still proceed with the game. It seems to be a common thing when a car combat game's main focus is not combat, the game usually sucks. You need to destroy generators hidden throughout the level. Sometimes these things are hidden away, so it takes forever to find them, and you end up driving around aimlessly, bored out of your mind, wanting to get it over with. There's nothing wrong with a game that challenges your mind, but this is a moment where the game actually gives you nothing to go off of, and you're stuck finding them all by yourself. In larger levels, they did the classic lazy strategy of copy and pasting the same environment over and over again, so you end up backtracking to places you've already been, making it rage-inducing for some people to finish the levels. It's like putting someone in an operating room, throwing utensils in their face, telling them to go get ready to perform open heart surgery with 0 help. It's fucked. You have areas with secret bosses in some levels. In the first level, there's this cave with a giant flaming gun coming from the roof and a ship flying around. You can go through the trouble of killing it if you want to. Do I get anything for it? No. Is it fun? No. Is there a purpose of this existing? No. So just turn around and leave. You do this in every level for the rest of the game. There is no difference at all. Every single level is exactly the same. Driving around mindlessly in boring shit-looking landscapes with pointless enemies to fight. There are no secrets worth your time. There are no collectibles. Well, technically there are collectibles with tokens. You get these quote-unquote upgrades for getting a bunch of them, but it's just negligible trash and there's no reason to go for it whatsoever. The final boss is the Crime Lord. Who is he? I have no idea. Who are any of these gangs? I don't fucking know. This was not 1985 where the instruction manual for a game was the equivalent of a Bible and you need to have it to understand what's going on. Metal Gear Solid came out 2 years before this and had the ability to tell a story through its gameplay. Yes, it is an insult to Metal Gear to even compare it to a piece of trash like this, but why couldn't you tell us who these people are? Hell, even in the games you were ripping off, the characters had small bios telling us something. In the case of Twisted Metal 3, it wasn't much, but the player had something to go off of. Here, all we get is a picture. Do you really expect us to use our imagination like a fucking board game? Anytime I perform an action in this game, it feels meaningless. I question why I'm even doing it in the first place. Even attempting to include it here seems like a waste of my time. Grudge Warriors at release was priced at $10 fucking dollars when it came out. $10, and that is not even worth it. The game is actually worthless. I'm not laughing, I'm not upset, I'm not happy, I'm not angry, and the worst feeling of any entertainment is apathy. The game describes itself like this. Players control a powerful tank-like armored vehicle which they use to destroy enemy vehicles, weapons, generators, solve puzzles, and collect tokens to upgrade their weapons. There are a total of 23 missions, and the game allows 2 players to battle each other in split-screen multiplayer. If you have any friends that want to play this game, you should not be friends with them anymore. This is not one of the worst car combat games I've ever played, this is one of the worst games I've ever played. I wanted to give this a second chance and see if it would be good in any regards, but this, no, just fuck this game. It's the same piece of trash I remember it as, so just fuck this game. The final game we are going to be looking at is Dead in the Water for the PlayStation. I didn't even plan for most of these games to be bad so far. Battle Tanks wasn't horrible, but not great. Assault Rigs was completely garbage, and the only planned game was Grudge Warriors to give it a second chance, but clearly that did not go well. So now we have this game, and I really hope it's good for the love of God. We are finally playing a game where we pilot a small watercraft propelled by paddles, oars, sails, or motor, open or partially decked and usually less than 45 feet, roughly 14 meters in length, in other words a boat, which is a breath of fresh air. Dead in the Water has two different ways to play the game, racing or the traditional arena brawling. People have adapted to what Twisted Metal turned this genre into, but before vehicular combat was all about normal racing with the ability to pick up weapons and kill people, which I prefer the Twisted Metal way. The throwback to the classic car combat style is a nice addition. I jumped into the racing portion first, and thankfully this game gives us 13 of the most disgusting looking characters I've ever seen in my life. I thought the Grudge Warrior characters were hideous, but these ones are on a whole new level. I can't be bothered to look at these disgusting things for long, so I decided to go with Agent X, and right away we're back to the abysmal control scheme. If it was before Twisted Metal, you could give it the benefit of the doubt. All of the people were new and trying different things with the car combat controls, but this was 1999, and I said before, if you're gonna rip off one thing from Twisted Metal, steal the control scheme. It plays wonderfully. We have the classic up as acceleration, triangle as machine guns, fucking circle to shoot. It takes time to get adapted, but it feels so strange to play this. This game apparently has special weapons, but the entire time I played, I couldn't figure out how to use them. Maybe it's a pickup? They were used against me, which is the only reason I knew of their existence. Great sign, right? When it comes to racing, it's just your 3 standard laps around the track. There are no interesting mechanics or things to spice it up, just driving on a figure 8 circuit. And after winning this race, I saw you were able to upgrade your boat, buy some weapons before the next level starts. It's a nice addition that not a lot of these games have. I'm sure the changes are negligible, but at least it's something. But the next level is where everything went downhill. Playing in a figure 8 is a simple design and easy for anyone to play. The Grand Canyon right here, complete trash. This is a terrible, terrible level, and the game's flaws really start to come out. Mainly the fact the physics and level design were not created for racing. You need to drive in snake paths in a game that doesn't even have an e-brake, making sharp turns very difficult. My first attempt I died before I could figure out what was going on, and that level ended thankfully. When you lose, you don't get a second chance, so it brings you to the next level and puts you in 4th place. Because racing or battling against 3 people is so fun, it was hard to contain my excitement. Going into the Arctic level, it's the same shit. Trying to control yourself is overly difficult without an e-brake. There's so much trash in the way, icebergs, ice blocks, and strange looking tiki things to bud your head against and lose your momentum. The AI, of course, never hits them and drives flawlessly all the way through, so actually winning races is very hard in this game. I got 3rd place because one of the enemies died, and I got told, uh-oh, too bad you didn't get enough points to go to the next season, and it kicked me back to the main menu. They decided to go with this strange season format. You play a couple of levels, and depending on where you place, you get points. If you are top 2, it will bring you to the next season, and if not, you will have to start over from the beginning. Going back through is the fake natural team. I finished first on the Speedway level. Going back to the Grand Canyon, it was a nightmare. At least I could actually play the level and not die instantly. But no matter how well I drove, catching up to the other people in front of me was impossible. There are no turbo pads, no drifting to go faster. You just drive in a straight line and attempt to blow them up. If you don't, then you'll most likely lose. Out of my 3 attempts at the racing section, I couldn't get past the first season, and I just could not get myself to give a shit anymore. The traditional car combat section doesn't fare much better. You only go against 3 opponents on every level. Maybe it was a stability issue, I don't know. But the one thing I can say is that the game gets very boring really fast for this reason alone. I picked this overpowered character and blazed through all of the levels. It was pretty easy. The AI are not too bad. Sometimes they'll chase you down, so picking a heavily armored vehicle is probably the best idea for this mode. But when I advanced to the next season, the levels were exactly the same as the previous season, which confused me because at first I thought there is no fucking way you just keep playing the same levels over and over again. But you do. They just add one per season, which makes 0 sense. Car combat within itself is a very redundant genre, so you need things to spice it up. Interesting landscapes, intricate map design, good variety in weapons, which this game does not really have, mind you. The most original thing this game has for a pickup is a fucking flamethrower. When I finally made it to the new level, which was the last level in the season, it was this flat, boring area once again, and that's when I shut the game off and stopped playing it because of how bored I was. It held my attention longer than Grudge Warriors did, but that's not really saying much. At least this game tried in some cases. The characters actually have bios, and they attempted to make a small story out of it, even though it's really stupid and makes no sense. They say letters got sent out to people for them to join in a tournament to kill each other for a grand prize, with no mention of what that grand prize even is. Not being able to figure out how to do the specials confuses me beyond all belief. The control in the game is awful for the racing. In the combat, it's tolerable. Just play this game for 10 minutes in the racing portion, then go play something like Hydro Thunder, and you'll see what I mean how terrible the controls are for racing. When you spread spread yourself too thin, this is what happens. Twisted Metal 2012 made that same mistake by putting racing into the game, which is hated by almost everyone who has played it. Just like here, it's the worst part of Dead in the Water. The map design is incredibly boring, the combat has no depth at all, just pick up missiles and keep pressing circle. Very enticing gameplay. There's not much else to say about this shit heap. I did leave out some things in these games because I didn't put a ton of hours into them, so I can't mention every intricacy and feature they have. Maybe they get better over time, but I really doubt it. Make a good game and then I'll have more to say about them. It's really unfortunate all of these games were not very good. I was really hoping for a good Twisted Metal alternative. Playing pieces of garbage like this really makes you appreciate games like Twisted Metal 3. Sure, it's not the best in the series, probably the worst in a lot of cases, but everything that game has to offer is so much better than any of these things that I just played. Maybe it's the NES syndrome where one or two franchises are just that much better than everything else around it, the other games start to look bad in comparison. I don't know. I can't give up trying to find more games that can work as alternatives for car combat. None of these games are the move, and I would recommend avoiding them at all costs. Battle tanks could be a little bit of fun if you wanted to try that one out, but the rest of these I would not touch again with a 10,000 foot pole.